Deep inside the Forbidden City, past the grand halls and private chambers, there was a special room called the Hall of Union. And in that room, there was a cast iron plaque. It wasn't a piece of art or a poem. It was a threat, installed by Emperor Shunzhi for every eunuch to see. The plaque listed the names of the most powerful and corrupt eunuchs from the previous Ming dynasty. This plaque was a promise. Any eunuch who dared to interfere in politics, accept bribes, or communicate with outside officials would be swiftly executed. This plaque is the perfect symbol of the Qing dynasty's emphasis on controlling their eunuchs. They had seen firsthand how eunuch corruption helped bring down the Ming dynasty, and they were determined to prevent that from ever happening again. Hey everyone, I'm Amy. Today we're going to explore the cruel world of the Qing dynasty eunuchs. Let's uncover the system designed to keep them on a leash, the harsh realities of their lives, and how Empress Dowager Cixi shattered that system. Let's start with a quick reminder. Imperial eunuchs were castrated men who served the emperor and his family. If you want to learn more about the history of eunuchs and how they brought about the fall of the Han Dynasty, be sure to check out my previous video. When the Manchu took control of China and formed the Qing Dynasty, they inherited the magnificent Forbidden City. But they also inherited its problems. Chief among them was a deep-seated fear of eunuchs. Emperor Qianlong himself even famously wrote, "The Ming Dynasty did not fall to rebels, but to eunuchs." The Manchu were determined not to repeat that history. In the early Qing Dynasty, the young Emperor Shunzhi, facing a mountain of palace affairs, needed an organized system to manage the thousands of eunuchs in the imperial palace. In 1653, he established a powerful, eunuch-led administration modeled after the Ming system, known as the 13 Offices. The heads of these offices were granted incredible power and status. The chief eunuch of the emperor's own palace was even called the Grand Minister of the Central Hall, a title that was a pretty high-ranking official in the government. The Manchu nobility watched in horror. They saw this as a dangerous repeat of the very system that had doomed Ming dynasty. An unofficial account even claims that at an imperial banquet, the eunuchs from the 13 offices tried to push ahead of the imperial princess in the line to pay their respects. One eunuch leader, Meng Jinglu, even began to refer to himself as a government official instead of a servant. These were signs of unacceptable arrogance. This must not be allowed again. Emperor Shunzhi himself tried to put the genie back in the bottle. In 1655, he installed the famous iron plaque that threatened death to any eunuch who meddled in politics. He also issued a series of edicts that restricted eunuch power. But for the powerful Manchu nobility, these warnings weren't enough. They didn't want to just manage the powerful eunuch system. They wanted to dismantle it. As soon as the Emperor Shunzhi died in 1661, the Qing dynasty government immediately abolished the 13 offices. They seized control of the inner court by fully establishing the powerful organization run by loyal Manchu bondservants, the Imperial Household Department. Power was stripped from the eunuchs and placed firmly in the Manchu hands. But the thousands of eunuchs still needed to be managed. And so, the Chamber of Attendants, Jingshi Fang, was created in 1677. Emperor Kangxi established the Chamber of Attendants not as a source of eunuch power, but as the very tool designed to contain it. It was a subordinate department placed under the watchful eyes of the Imperial Household Department, with one primary mission: to manage, monitor, and control the entire eunuch population of the Forbidden City. Emperor Kangxi himself explained, "The palace needs eunuchs for errands, so I use them. How could I ever lend my authority to this kind of person?" The Qing dynasty's system for controlling eunuchs wasn't just a policy. It was an obsession, built on layers of rules and brutal punishments. The most powerful symbol of this was a cast iron plaque that Emperor Shunzhi placed in the Hall of Union and the Imperial Household Department for all to see. It listed the names of the most infamous powerful eunuchs of the Ming Dynasty as a warning, and ended with a terrifying threat. Any eunuchs caught interfering in politics, accepting bribes, or communicating with outside officials would be severely punished, including execution by slow slicing, also known as death by 1,000 cuts. But this plaque was just the beginning. The Qing Dynasty emperors wrapped their eunuchs in a web of regulations, so detailed and specific, it's hard to believe. These were known as the crime ordinances. It seemed like there was a rule for everything. There were ordinances against gambling, ordinances against escaping, and even an ordinance against fishing in the imperial ponds and streams without permission. In the late Qing Dynasty, one of the most detailed was the ordinance against smoking opium, which laid out a complex system of searches and punishments. The consequences for getting caught in this web were swift and brutal, laid out in the Imperial Household Department's own 50-article rulebook for punishments. For instance, if a eunuch was caught privately hiding a firearm, gunpowder, or even a blade in the palace, the punishment was immediate execution. The rules governing internal discipline were just as harsh. If a high-ranking eunuch beat a junior eunuch without his master's permission, he would be exiled. Or if a regular eunuch did the same, he would be executed. Even personal despair offered no escape. Harming yourself was a capital crime. A eunuch who was saved after attempting to hang himself would tragically be sentenced to strangulation. On the other hand, if he succeeded, his corpse would be thrown into the wilderness, and his family would be exiled to the frontier and given as slaves to soldiers. Even simple pleasures were forbidden. Any eunuch caught leaving the palace to drink alcohol or watch an opera would be beaten with a heavy bamboo staff 100 times and forced to wear a cane for a month. This was the reality of a Qing eunuch's life. It was a world of constant surveillance and terrifying consequences, all enforced by the Chamber of Attendants and the Imperial Household Department. The entire system was designed to ensure that a Qing Dynasty eunuch could never again dream of the power their Ming Dynasty predecessors once held. Once a young eunuch completes his training, he would be assigned a formal role. While the Qing Dynasty system stripped them of official political power their Ming Dynasty predecessors held, the thousands of eunuchs were still the indispensable workforce that made the Forbidden City function. From the most manual chores to the most trusted positions, their responsibilities were wide-ranging. For most, life was a grind of endless anonymous labor. Thousands were assigned to palace chores like cleaning, lighting lamps, and sweeping the endless courtyards. They were the cleaners in the Office of Cleaning, the cooks and dishwashers in the imperial kitchens, and the servants who prepared every single cup of tea in the Office of Tea. But if a eunuch had a special talent, he could escape the mundane jobs. An artistic eunuch might find a life on the stage in the court of the imperial theatricals, trained as an actor or musician to entertain the emperor and his court. Others became part of the grand spectacle of the court, serving as silent figures in silk robes, handling sacred objects during the complex rituals managed by the Office of Ceremonies. Then there were the administrators, the eunuchs who formed the bureaucracy of the inner court. They were the ultimate gatekeepers, controlling the palace doors and passes, as well as who had access to the emperor. Some handled the emperor's most sensitive secrets, working in inner court offices like the Office of Memorials to manage the flow of government documents. The Chamber of Attendants itself was run by eunuchs, who were responsible for managing the assignments, discipline, and conduct of the entire eunuch and palace-maid population. And finally, there were the elite imperial attendants. These were the trusted few who served the emperor personally. They were the first to see him in the morning and the last to see him at night. They prepared his clothes, served his food, and arranged his bath. Though their official power was limited, their constant proximity to the emperor gave them a unique and intimate form of influence. From the grandest ceremony to the smallest chore, every aspect of life in the Forbidden City depended on the labor of the eunuchs. The official rules paint a picture of the eunuch's world, but what was it actually like to live the life of a Qing dynasty eunuch? After the dynasty fell, a number of elderly former eunuchs shared their stories, giving us a rare and heartbreaking glimpse into their world. These stories were compiled into the records of late Qing palace life, and it all began with a brutal, life-altering act, the act of castration, or purifying the body, 净身. A eunuch named Ma Deqing recalled the day his life changed forever. He was 9 years old, and his desperately poor father decided this was his son's only path to a better life. Ma Deqing said, "He held me down on the bed and personally performed the operation. I can't tell you how much it hurt and how terrified I was. I passed out from the pain I don't know how many times." In an age without modern anesthetic and medicine, the procedure was butchery. For the next 4 months, he was forced to lie flat on his back with a quill inserted into his urethra to prevent it from sealing shut. His wounds dressed with crude paper coated in wax and pepper. Every change of dressing, he remembered, was another wave of agony that made you feel like you were dying all over again. While some fathers took this horrific step themselves, most boys were sent to specialists. According to the eunuch Ren Futian, there were men in Beijing famous for this trade, known by names like Bi Wu and Little Knife Liu. These men had years of experience and specialized tools. But as Ren Futian noted, even in their hands, the procedure was still agonizing, as their only form of sterilization was to hold a knife over a flame. If a boy survived and was accepted into the Forbidden City, his education in servitude began. The first step, according to the eunuch Wei Ziqing, was to find a master, a senior eunuch who would take him on as an apprentice. This relationship was less about mentorship and more about enslavement. The apprentice had to wake before dawn to prepare his master's washing water, serve him hand and foot, and only to go to sleep after his master was sound asleep, remaining on call throughout the night. It was a strict hierarchy where, as Wei Ziqing said, one layer suppressed another, and the apprentice was at the very bottom. The apprentice had to learn a dizzying array of rules. The eunuch Bian Fa Chang recalled the complexities of something as simple as language. The emperor was Lord of 10,000 years, Wan Sui Ye. Empress Dowager Cixi was the old Buddha, Lao Fo Ye. The concubines were masters, 主子. There were taboo words that could never be spoken if they sounded like the names of the royals. He gave the example of the great eunuch Zhang Lande, whose original name, Chun Xi, had to be changed to Lande because the Empress Dowager Long Yu's childhood name also contained the character Xi. And there were countless ways to kneel, from the formal two-legged kneel for answering a question, to the 9 prostration of a grand ceremony, to a single-legged kneel for a superior. For the vast majority of low-ranking eunuchs, daily life was a grind of endless chores defined by a single pervasive emotion, fear. The slightest mistake could result in a brutal beating. The eunuch Liu Xingqiao described serving the famously moody Empress Dowager Cixi as a nightmare. He said she was cruel and ruthless, and beatings were a daily occurrence for the smallest mistake. Apparently, the beatings were so common that many eunuchs would secretly tie thick leather pads to their thighs before their shifts to lessen the pain of the inevitable caning. And if one eunuch made a mistake, everyone in his shared room would be punished along with him. He even recounted a horrifying story where Cixi forced an old eunuch to eat his own feces, an act of humiliation that led to the man's death. The eunuch Wang Yuechun said their life was no different from being in prison and summarized the only way to survive this life as don't see yourself as a human. After surviving decades of this, a eunuch's end was often just as bleak. When they became too old or sick to work, they were cast out of the palace. The eunuch Zhang Deshou explained that they had nowhere to go. Society looked down on them, and their families often couldn't be found or didn't want them back. They had been trained for a life of service and had no other skills to survive in the outside world. For most, the only option was to use their meager life savings to pay for lodging and sustenance in a Buddhist or Taoist temple, which became their final, lonely retirement home. While the official records show a system of brutal and tragic bureaucratic control, a very different story is told in unofficial histories and popular folklore. This is where we find the sensational legends about the Chamber of Attendants and its most secret duty, managing the emperor's sex life. According to these unofficial accounts, the process began each night after the emperor finished his dinner, a time of great anticipation for the women of the harem. A high-ranking eunuch from the Chamber of Attendants would present him with a large tray. On this tray were several green-headed plaques, each bearing the name of a concubine. The emperor would then flip one over to signify his choice for the night. This ritual, known as flipping the plaques, was the only path to the emperor's bed. Unofficial stories claim that the empress herself held the ultimate power, deciding the master list of which concubines were even eligible to have their names placed on the tray. However, from that approved list, it was the eunuchs of the Chamber of Attendants who physically prepared the tray each night, choosing which dozen or so plaques would actually be presented. This created a crucial two-tiered system of influence. A concubine needed the empress's favor just to be considered, but she also had to constantly bribe the eunuchs to ensure her plaque was not only chosen for the tray that night, but also placed in a prominent spot where the emperor was more likely to see it. Once the emperor made his choice, the head eunuch of the Chamber of Attendants would take the selected plaque and hand it off to his subordinates to begin the summoning ritual. A group of these eunuchs would then proceed to the chosen concubine's residence to formally notify her. After overseeing her bathing, the eunuchs themselves would strip the concubine completely naked, a security measure to ensure she couldn't hide a weapon. They would then tightly wrap her body in a large quilt or cloak. One specially designated eunuch, known as a piggybacking eunuch, was tasked with the physical transport. He would carry the wrapped concubine on his back all the way to the emperor's bedchamber. Upon arrival, the eunuch would unwrap her and place her on the bed. The control of the Chamber of Attendants didn't end there. The eunuchs would wait just outside the door, timing the encounter, which was limited to between 30 minutes to an hour. When the time was up, the head eunuch would call out, "It is time." If he was ignored, he would call out up to 3 times. If the emperor still didn't comply, the eunuchs had the authority to summon the empress to the door to loudly recite the ancestral rules, a surefire way to end the evening. After the encounter, the concubine would have to exit the bed by crawling backwards, be wrapped in a quilt again, and carried away. The final step fell to the head eunuch, who would ask the emperor the fateful question, keep or not keep? If the emperor said keep, the event was recorded in the ledger to legitimize any potential pregnancy. If he said don't keep, the eunuch would perform a form of contraception to ensure no heir was conceived. Unofficial accounts describe several chilling methods for this. One of the most common stories claims a eunuch would take the concubine to a separate room, locate a specific acupuncture point on her lower back, and apply firm rolling pressure. Another even more brutal account claimed the eunuchs would first administer medicinal drugs, and if those failed, they would perform a risky surgery, likely a form of abortion. While shocking, this management of pregnancy is likely fictional. as the Qing dynasty actually had another department that managed the lineage of the imperial family, known as the Imperial Clan Court, Zongrenfu, and the palace doctors in the Imperial Medical Bureau. If there was a process to manage pregnancy, it would more likely have been under the supervision of the Imperial Clan Court and the Imperial doctors, and not the Imperial eunuchs. Also, it's important to remember that these vivid bedroom rituals are not documented in the official Qing dynasty historical records. In fact, this entire narrative is contradicted by the autobiography of the last emperor, Pu Yi, who clearly stated that the eunuchs of the Chamber of Attendants did not manage his intimate life. But then, Pu Yi was forced to abdicate the throne when he was only 6 years old. While he continued to live in the Forbidden City for 12 years after that, the Qing dynasty had already collapsed, and he lived in a shrunken court that no longer resembled the world of the emperors before him. So it is likely that his testimony may not have accurately represented the full history of the rules and experience of the previous emperors. The Qing dynasty eunuch system was designed to be an unbreakable cage, keeping eunuchs firmly in their place as servants. But in the final, chaotic decades of the dynasty, one person's patronage could shatter any rule. The Empress Dowager Cixi. After seizing power in 1861, Cixi was surrounded by powerful Manchu princes and officials, whom she couldn't fully trust. So she turned to the one group whose loyalty was absolute, her personal eunuchs. Unlike a government minister, a eunuch had no family clan or external power base. His influence, wealth, and survival depended entirely on his master's success. In doing so, she was repeating a classic pattern from Chinese history. Centuries earlier, emperors of the Han dynasty, trapped between powerful clans and officials, had also turned to their eunuchs as the only faction they could truly trust. In a court full of rivals, Cixi used her eunuchs as her eyes, her ears, and her most trusted agents. She broke the rules of the Qing dynasty to reward her eunuchs and consolidated her own rule, and by doing so, allowed them to break free from their chains and accumulate a degree of power not seen since the Ming dynasty. First came An Dehai, the arrogant favorite. An Dehai was clever and positioned himself perfectly to help Cixi before she came to power during the Xinyu coup of 1861. He acted as her secret messenger between the imperial court in exile and her allies in the capital, leading to the coup's success. This earned him Cixi's absolute trust, and he became not just her confidant, but her political operative. With Cixi's backing, he became involved in political maneuvers and even held influence over the imperial family. He became a wedge between Cixi and her son, the young emperor Tongzhi, often speaking ill of the emperor in front of his mother. The emperor grew to hate An Dehai, but was completely helpless, as the eunuch was protected by Cixi. But this power went to his head, becoming cocky and arrogant. In 1869, he made a fatal mistake. With Empress Dowager Cixi's quiet approval, he left the capital on a lavish imperial-style tour down the Grand Canal, allegedly to procure dragon robes. This was a violation of the ancestral law forbidding eunuchs from leaving Beijing without official orders. His enemies, including the resentful emperor, saw their chance. The governor of Shandong, Ding Baozhen, arrested An Dehai, cited the ancestral law, and had him publicly beheaded in Jinan. Empress Dowager Cixi, for all her power, was unable to save him. Next was Li Lianying, the ultimate survivor. He learned from An Dehai's mistakes. Where An Dehai was cocky, Li Lianying was cautious. Where An Dehai made enemies, Li Lianying built alliances. According to one legend, he first gained Empress Dowager Cixi's favor through a unique skill. Apparently, he studied the most fashionable hairstyles in Beijing's brothels to become her personal hairdresser, a role that gave him unparalleled private access to her. But it was his cunning loyalty that made him indispensable. In another dramatic story, he supposedly overheard a plot to eliminate Cixi, crawled through a dog hole in the palace wall at night, and ran to warn her relatives, saving her life. For the next 4 decades, he was Empress Dowager Cixi's shadow, her most trusted confidant and gatekeeper. She broke the ultimate rule for him, raising him to the rank of a second-grade official, a rank far above the 4-grade rank limit for eunuchs. Legends accuse him of countless crimes, such as accepting massive bribes. Folklores claim that he helped Empress Dowager Cixi to poison her co-regent, the Empress Dowager Cian. Other rumors blamed him for following Cixi's orders to persecute the emperor's beloved consort Ke Shun, also known as the Pearled Consort Zhen Fei, and finally drowning her in a well. But unlike An Dehai, Li Lianying survived the death of Empress Dowager Cixi. He was allowed to retire from the palace and died a few years later. Finally, there was Zhang Lande, better known by his palace name Xiaode Zhang, the last powerful eunuch. He began his career in the palace opera troupe, gaining Empress Dowager Cixi's favor by finding famous performers to entertain her. Uniquely, he was known to have shown kindness to the imprisoned Emperor Guangxu, secretly swapping out his meager meals for better food. After Cixi's death, he became the chief eunuch and indispensable advisor to the new, indecisive Empress Dowager Long Yu. He became her backbone, consolidating power in the final chaotic years of the empire. His final role in history was his most significant. In 1912, the general Yuan Shikai needed to convince the court to dissolve the Qing Empire. He worked with Xiaode Zhang, offering him a huge bribe to persuade the Empress Dowager Long Yu to sign the abdication paper for the child emperor Pu Yi. The man who had entered the palace as a lowly servant ended up playing a key part in bringing the 2,000-year-old imperial system to an end. The Qing dynasty eunuch system was born from a deep-seated fear, a reaction to the chaos of the past. The system was built to be one of the most restrictive systems in Chinese history to keep their eunuchs on a leash. But behind the rules and regulations was a life of cruelty. Castrated as children, stripped of family ties, and bound by endless punishments. Most eunuchs lived and died in fear. As many of them later recalled, their existence was in many ways even worse than that of a slave. And in the end, no system was foolproof. When the ultimate authority, Empress Dowager Cixi, decided the rules no longer applied to her favorites, the entire carefully constructed cage simply vanished. So was the Qing dynasty system ultimately a success? In one sense, yes. It achieved its primary goal. There was no eunuch-led coup, and no eunuch ever truly seized the control of the government. The system held, but it failed to stop powerful individuals from becoming central to the court's corruption and political intrigue in the empire's final desperate years. What do you think? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed today's topic, don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to support this channel and help me uncover more fascinating stories from Chinese history. Please check out my membership. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
Stay curious, stay magical.